the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everybody.
Our guest today has amassed hundreds of thousands of social media fans and followers by dispensing down-to-earth relationship wisdom and brilliant life hacks.
Licensed therapist Eli Harwood is more than a whiz at making viral content. The author and content creator explains the brainy stuff of attachment theory along with DIY tricks for better relationships in a way that is absurdly helpful.
And that's not her making big claims. That's us. She's been helpful to us, okay? We don't just, crap on all the self-helpy things on this podcast. Sometimes we actually tell you about the stuff that we do endorse in this space, and Eli's work is one of those things. But
here's the thing. We're always deeply interested in exploring how what happened to us happened to us.
We also want to know and share with our listeners real-life steps to heal from toxic shit while deprogramming from cults or culty relationships.
To have Eli join us for a chat about the way the attachment patterns impact our vulnerability to culty situations and vice versa. How all the culty crap affects our attachment patterns. It can be a real intricate Venn diagram or line graph or Gantt chart. Either way, it's better dissected by a pro.
And Eli is a pro, but just a word to the wise, we do cover the topic of abuse in this episode, so listen with care. And also, sorry for any F-bombs. And also, this podcast is not a substitute for the kind of care you will get from a credentialed licensed therapist in therapy. It's just a podcast.
Guys,
that covers it.
I think that covers it all. Without further ado, let's get into it. And here's our chat with Eli Harwood.
Eli Harwood, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
It's on.
Thank you. So good to be with you all.
I, first of all, have to apologize for having to reschedule a bazillion times.
If you weren't rescheduling a billion times, I'd question whether you really had children or not.
Or a podcast, for that matter.
Or a podcast.
Or trying to shine light on cult abuse. And it's just crazy. Well, it's just a crazy time of life anyway, but all the things, yes.
All the things.
Well, thank you for making time for us. For those of us in our audience who haven't heard of you yet, what's your elevator pitch for who you are, what you do, what you're all about?
I would say I'm a mom. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been practicing for almost 2 decades. And in that time, my passion has been around looking at the attachment science. So how do our early relationships and our relationships with the people close to us affect how we develop, how we feel about ourselves, and how we engage the world? And so my mission is like, how can I take this information and make it accessible and digestible and help people use it in the real world to improve the relationships that matter most to them? Therefore, making the world a little more connected, a little less crazy.
So
Love
it's too
it.
late for you and I, Sarah.
It might be too late for us. No, I actually found a lot of hope. A lot
It's
of
for our
hope.
kids, though.
A lot of hope from your book.
Oh, thank you.
At first I was like, God, I wish I just had like a podcast about parenting and life and, because there's all these other things I want to talk about. But really there is so much to talk about in terms of attachment and cults and cultic abuse and abuse in general. So I know this is going to be...
We'll hit all the things.
We'll hit all the things.
Yes. And my second book is coming out. So my first book, that book is like, hey, here's how you kind of might want to reflect on some of the attachment stuff that happened in your life, right? And we'll talk about kind of what that looks like. And then my second book is, and here's how you can prevent passing on all that insecure stuff that you inherited to your kids. So it's called Raising Securely Attached Kids, but it's not out till September. So you have to wait for it. So you have to do the workbook first, which is how this whole gig goes anyway.
Yes. You got to do the work, but not the work in a culty way, because almost all cults say you have to do the work.
Preach.
So we have to be careful about that. We have to find another way of saying doing the work.
We re-normalize it. We take it back.
We take it back?
Yeah.
To
reclaim it.
Your life? Okay.
Yeah, reclaim it.
I like it. Let's just reclaim it. The healing work. Oh, yeah. I felt this while reading your book, by the way. I was like, oh my gosh, the line between like the languaging around like healthy experiences and cultic experiences is so freaking tight. You know, like I'm a teacher. I teach, but like I have no interest in making anyone my slave. But like that's the language that gets used in cults. So I'm aware of, even after just recently reading your book, almost feeling in my nervous system like a little bit of like discombobulation around, which I would usually use in really healthy ways, because I could see how it got hijacked in really manipulative ways.
Yeah. And the thing that since we left, it took me a while to figure this out, and Sarah can attest, the thing I got most sensitive to, like in our climate going on right now, wherever you lean politically, it's the use of language and words and how they're just repetition and meaning gets changed. I'm like, see, Sarah, it's right there. It's right there. It's all over the place. So I'm super sensitive to that.
How language can be used to manipulate.
And before we nerd out on all the definitions that you have, because I think it's important.
Tools of thought.
Yes, right. You need those definitions. Just curious, because I know you just binged The Vow.
Yes.
How was that for you? And what are your initial thoughts in relation to your work?
Oh, the initial thoughts could take us 3 hours, but it was really emotional for me. I feel very protective of you two. And I just knowing I was about to come into spaces with you, I feel really protective. It led me to just walking through some of my own experiences. I wouldn't say I've ever been a cult, but I've definitely been in high control religion, and I've been in an abusive, intimate relationship. So just like listening to the story and feeling in my own body the echoes of the way that abuse smells, feels, tastes, right? Like I definitely felt some connection. I called a dear friend who was in a cult that reminds me so much of NXIVM, except with a religious bent, and just checked in on her. How are you doing? I haven't brought this up in a while. How are you? Like, I'm just so aware of this. And we chatted a little bit. She'd watched The Vow, so we were talking about her experience of watching it. It's tender, y'all. This is tender stuff. One of the things that I thought about a lot while watching it is how there's a lot of mythology around cults, meaning that we want to believe that the only person who could get sucked into a cult is someone who's really unwell and lacks core self. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's a brilliant in the manipulation of someone who's running a cult, that they are able to find risk factors in anyone, people who are deeply wounded and people who are fairly secure. So we can talk more about that. And when I was watching, I was kind of, I'm analyzing Keith as I'm watching, like, what's he doing? What's this about? What's happening in his theory of mind is a word we use in the attachment research. So like, how does his perspective on relationships create these dynamics? I don't know. Yeah, I could go on and on and on.
What did you come up with?
Okay. So in attachment research, what we have discovered is that the way that a caregiver interacts with a child sets a template. And it sets the template for several really important things. So one is how the child regulates their emotions, which therefore is affecting their brain development. So how safe does that child feel in that relationship? So if they're upset and they're sad, is there someone there being responsive and warm? Oh, honey, is your diaper wet? Are you hungry? I'm here. I got you. Right? That kind of synchronicity. Is there someone who is capable of coming in into connection and soothing? Right? Because if that's happening, then what's happening internally in the brain is my needs matter, and I'm going to get what I need. And when I'm tender, I'm going to reach for my people, because that's going to be an effective way to be soothed. But if I have caregivers who are themselves insecure in their attachment pattern, they might project meaning onto my emotions. Now, again, I just use the word meaning, and I cannot get Keith Rainier out of my head. Now I've got,
That's okay.
What does this
We know
mean
what
to
you
you?
mean.
Oh, motherfucker, it means I feel unsafe with you. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
But so that meaning of the caregiver is getting imposed onto the child. So if the child is crying and the caregiver's like, you really need to learn to self-soothe, right? And this is a 3-month-old who doesn't have the prefrontal cortex in order to do that. But over time, the child learns, when I am upset, no one's coming to help. They have to form a belief system about the world in order to cope with that, right? And so that belief system might be, I'm a burden, I'm too much. It also might be emotions are indulgent, right? Only an integrated person is healthy and well. They've resolved all of their, what do we call them, flaws, imperfections, whatever the languaging was.
He fortifies his weaknesses.
Yeah. So at some point, I don't know what his story is, but at some point, there's probably several factors. One, there's probably some genetic factor, because not everybody is born into insecure experiences and then wants to have sex slaves.
I hope not.
They don't. So there's some genetic predisposition for whatever that was and is. But I think there's also some deficit in his experiences that led him to believe that the primary positive way he wanted to relate to other people is through dominance, control, power. And I see this as like abuse as a disease of the mind. It's inherited in relationship to others. My guess is that beyond there being some form of emotional neglect in his life, there was also some exposure to some kind of abuse. Do we know any of this?
We have some speculation that
Promise, a lot of it's his telling.
Yeah, but the women are, and also from the women around him that knew him, but we also don't know what we do know from schoolmates, which I think are probably the less.
Sure.
It's not from his words to them; it's from their perceptions of him. Is that he was super nerdy, and at some point got some assessment that he was quite intelligent, and then that sort of boosted his
grandiosity.
Yeah, his grandiosity and esteem, and started to actually manipulate people around him at a young age. And I was also sexually active at a young age. And according to his dad, I believe, who told someone that we know, because this is such hearsay, but that he was like stringing women along from the age of like 11. Like he heard him on the phone saying like, you're the only one and I love you the most, like I love you so much, but like with multiple girls, like preteens, like young women. But we also have heard that, and also from his mouth, but his mother was very sick and he had to take care of her. And also that the dad left, he was like a madman, like in advertising in New York, and wasn't around.
Okay.
So he was mostly him and his mom. Some of the theories are just like massive resentment towards his mom, didn't have proper attachment or attunement with either. That's sort of the theory.
I would be curious about like sexual abuse at some point. Somehow he learned that the way to cope with his vulnerability in life was to find other people to dominate, right? And so relating is not mutual and vulnerable and co-regulatory. It's strategic. He relates strategically. He's thinking about how he can get to a position that makes him feel less vulnerable, that makes him feel regulated. And he only feels regulated when he is exalted. You said in there he wanted us to worship him. You know, I did a lot of this while I was watching.
For us too, especially because a lot of the behind the scenes stuff we didn't see.
Right.
It wasn't our.
After a few episodes, we were spectators.
Yeah. You know, like his home. We didn't have that view.
You don't know all of those things. Like you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And So his theory of mind in relationships is highly disturbed. It is not about mutuality and wanting to cultivate a bond or a connection that ultimately leads to both people being free. Right? There's no freedom in that. Like he had a goal and his goal was control. That was his goal. And he used sex for control, and he used intellect for control, and he used charm. Although I can't say I felt very charmed by him. Sometimes cult leaders are very charmed. Did you feel charmed by him?
Yeah.
You did. Okay.
Charm wasn't the word, I would say. And this is actually a note that I took because at the end of the book, you were talking about like the mirror neurons and like learning to, like even with your kids, like playing with them at their level and the matching and the empathy and all that stuff, which I was aware of, but I hadn't put the piece together about Keith was really good and was known for his, what they called in Nexium, rapport skills. It was even a class that they taught, like a neuro-linguistic programming teaches rapport. So I think what people felt drawn to, and I certainly did at certain times, he was good at the witness and was, when he was with you, he was very with you. And that goes into like the eye gazing and like things that other leaders are known for, like that deep, felt like connection, but really he was
being strategic.
Yeah, he's being
Yes.
strategic.
So,
yeah.
and this is where it's not where it's messed up. Yeah.
It was directed at women.
Yeah.
Even like when I was interfacing with him in meetings, he always felt distracted by, in hindsight, I always looked at it was like what a woman was doing or what intel he could get on a woman and under the guise that he was helping them. I think that's what he was totally dialed into, because I remember standing with him and other people would walk in and break rapport with me to see who came in. And he never really did that probably with women, although I wasn't privy to it. But I didn't feel like he ever locked in with me. I think he directed it at women.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because his ultimate goal was to create this harem of sex slaves, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, I would have been hurt more. I would have been more traumatized. I wasn't targeted in that way.
I also, do you think it's interesting, Sarah? Like, it doesn't seem like he also targeted you at the same level. He was targeting a lot of the other women in the cult.
Tell that theory, Sarah.
Well,
I
I think by the time I wrote the book, I didn't have all the information I have now. And what I've since learned is that he doesn't target like, hey, let's go for coffee or let's get to know each other. He would get somebody else to invite the woman. We've learned this from other women who did get closer, to start a business, be involved in a certain project, and that would bring them closer to him, either spend a chunk of time in Albany, be there more, and then he would slowly move in as like overseeing that project, coaching the person directly, and then it was like 8 steps before he made the move. And he did that with me. Like I was invited to 5 or 6 different projects, businesses that I just didn't move on because many of them involved moving to Albany and I didn't want to do that. Or inside, I thought those are really dumb business ideas. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I think you had a protective factor there. Like just reading your book, you have a little bit of like just listening to you going, what the fuck? Or like, no.
Yeah.
Like, there was just enough there. Or when he invited you for the middle of the night walk and you had the audition and you're like, no, I'm going to my audition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
What were
and
you?
I got in trouble for that.
Healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Yes.
I did have healthier boundaries.
But I think he also saw you as, okay, well, if not you, your network.
Yeah, I think at a certain point, because I never got majorly gaslit or messed with like some of the other women. And I think it's because they were just tapping my network.
I also don't think you had the same risk factors they did.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
What did you notice? I'm curious.
yeah. So, okay. So if we're thinking about attachment, in a secure experience, someone is growing up, they're feeling belonging in their relationships. They're feeling like their needs will be met. The developmental experience is really deeply grounding, right? There's variance in insecure experiences. So you could have an insecure experience where a caregiver or caregivers are able to do that sometimes, but then not always. So maybe they have a mood disorder. And so like when they're really depressed, they can't be very responsive. But when they're in a good place in their whatever they can or whatever. So there's an experience of sometimes I get what I need. And we would call that like a resistant or an ambivalent experience, which is this. The child learns to be hyper vigilant of the caregiver because they know that the caregiver can give them what they need emotionally sometimes, but not always. And so they become preoccupied with that caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, your general style, Sarah. Like,
yeah,
you know, you had some, like your parents were loving figures who wanted to give you care and they did their very best based on their level of regulation, right?
That's very true.
But it wasn't always there. And so there was a level of unpredictability that led you to become pretty focused on the people you have close caregiving relationships with, right? But there is still within you a sense that there's a care that can happen in relationships. Like you have that embedded in your nervous system. In an avoidant experience, there is a caregiver who is unable to be emotionally responsive and soothing. So they might be so dismissive in their mindset that when a child is upset, they ignore it or completely. And the pattern is that. So they are consistently disconnected. Okay. And that child doesn't have any hope that they're going to be able to get their caregiver to give them what they need. So their coping pattern is to distract themselves during moments of distress. So you learned how to scan and how to try to maybe even perform. How can I be good? How can I do the thing in order to get my needs met?
Yes.
There's an active engagement in like, how can I get closeness, right? Someone who has an avoidant experience, they have deactivated their reach for others in those moments because it's too painful to reach for a parent who's going to dismiss you every time. It's also too painful to reach for a parent who's going to be so anxious that they flood you with their anxiety when you're in a state of distress. So an avoidant child versus a resistant child, they're both insecure experiences, but there's different levels of having experienced love and care, okay? Then on the last end of the patterns, we have 4 patterns. The 4th pattern we would consider a disorganized experience. And in this experience, caregivers have been the source of fear. So caregivers have acted in ways that are erratic and frightening. So you imagine you're a little bean, you're a little bug, and you feel scared. And you have an instinct to go to your caregiver to get regulated and to feel safe. But your caregiver is so unwell that they also are scary for you. So there's a saber-toothed tiger, but my option for refuge is a grizzly bear. You can see how that discombobulates someone's sense of attachment and relationships. So rather than having a strategy, the avoidant child has a strategy. The resistant child has a strategy. I'm going to scan. I'm going to be hypervigilant. I'm going to watch everything you do, and I'm going to try to be cute and lovely for you so that you'll love me. The avoidant child is like, I'm going to just swallow it all in. I'm just going to keep it inside because it's just better to keep it inside than whatever you're going to do with it. The disorganized child is left without a strategy because there's no one really to go to. And so what happens instead is they enter trauma states. They get disassociated or they get reactive. Okay? And in the context of NXIVM, you had all sorts of different experiences of attachment. Folks coming in who had, I do think maybe even had secure attachment. I'm curious about India because her mom had a pretty healthy process from what I could tell in the documentary, a very differentiated sense of like wanting to help her daughter, but like not taking it personally, being very grounded in herself. So India may have had some secure experience. I don't know. Or maybe it was more like yours, Sarah. But I was watching everybody and I was thinking, I think the people who were closest to him probably had more avoidant experiences or disorganized experiences because what they felt when he gave him that witness was so profound to them. They'd never experienced it.
Yes.
And so I think that was such a higher risk factor, both for getting sucked deeper into the inner circle and also for feeling stuck there.
Yes.
Because if you've never had that before, it's intoxicating, can be alluring to anybody. That's why I say that. I think that you can be manipulated into a cult even if you are a very healthy person, depending on what your community is like at that moment, what your sense of self, like your main vulnerability was like your career feeling vulnerable, right?
And also wanting community and the support that would give me.
Yes, we're wired for attachment. We're also wired for community. Human beings have survived as long as we have because of our ability to work together. So the abusive person is playing on those instincts in us, those very wise instincts to bond with people and to feel seen and heard and mirrored, and also to have belonging and to be in community. And what you don't know on that onset is that it's not what's being presented. You don't know that. It's being the languaging is so lovely. I always tell people like, man, if I had been around Jonestown, it was the first integrated church in America. You know that?
Right. Yeah.
I would have vibed that shit. I would have been like, yes, we're doing this thing. This is right.
Yeah.
Have you heard the boiling frog analogy? I'm sure you have.
Oh, yeah. We use it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the analogy.
Steady diet of frogs over here. This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we? What you just put into words was what I've said in a very non-precise, non-academic, non-expert way, just from viewing the women that I knew pretty well, I thought, even though they weren't sharing who they were sleeping with me. But they all had what I would just call like dad issues or father issues. Like they didn't have strong relationships with their dads. And I totally was like, oh my God, Keith is filling that void without all the other scientific things you just said. You know, my dad and I do have a really solid relationship. He's wonderful. And me and my mom as well. But they did divorce when I was young, which you probably read in the book, and how you're able to piece those things together, even though they were super loving. And I'm saying this to be clear because I know they both listen to the podcast. They were amazing parents. But my childhood was a little bit fraught at a young age. And I felt very split and it was confusing. And they know that. And I don't blame them and I love them, just to be clear. Caveat. Okay.
Two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that our caregiver did the very best they could, and that in that there was something they couldn't control. I'm so prepped for the conversation later on in life when my kids come to me and they're like, this part of our lives was hard and didn't feel good. Or I don't know, it was weird to have a mom who was like a parenting influencer. Duh. That's weird. They're going to have feelings about that. And it's okay. That's okay. That's part of the goal. And my hope is that they can take what I've given and make it better. And in order to do that, they have to evaluate what wasn't great about it or what could have been better.
Can I call you when Troy's like, it was really weird to have parents who were, cult busters? Yeah, okay, great. Because that's going to happen. So far, he seems really proud, but I'm afraid it's going to bite him in the butt one day, and then he'll
have negative feelings about it. But he also has shelter in you all relationally. There's a sense of like, I have a place where I can go and be seen and known and be messy and not get shamed or punished for being messy. There's a lot to be said for the elasticity of a secure relationship. It's like, we all feel that. It's like you love someone.
It can't
and
be too structured.
Yeah. Nippy, I don't know much about your growing up and attachment. Tell us a little bit about what you think were your risk factors and how you got played upon.
Let's do that. But there's one thing I want to say, because you were describing Keith and how he looks at everyone else. It just hit me like, it didn't hit me. It's just different language for it. Like he's playing a different game with a different set of rules, and everyone else is playing on I want to see my goals, I want to see my attachments, I want to see community, all the things that are natural. He knows our rules and how to navigate them. He knows he's not playing by them. He's not restricted by them.
He's using them. He's brilliantly using them. He knows what it is
he's leveraging
you're
them.
Doing. It's ironic because he understands and he doesn't understand. He understands on a strategic level. He obviously doesn't understand on a core human level, which is like very obvious.
Tragic,
Yeah.
But he knows how to manipulate your drive to have community, your drive to be a part of making the world a better place, to have, your drive to have deeply intimate, close relationships where you're seen, heard, and felt. He knows how to use those things to his advantage. And I thought it was interesting, one of the things you said, Sarah, in there about how sometimes he would talk at such a level that you think he intentionally made it hard for people to understand what he was saying, so that everyone would be like, wow.
I got word salad.
Word salad. Yep. What is that? And I absolutely felt that watching him. I'm like, what the? Obviously, I'm going in already having a knowledge of who he is because you've blown the whistle. I'm like, this motherfucker doesn't know shit. He just knows it's how to manipulate the earnestness of other people. I don't know how smart he is. I'd be very curious to really get him an actual IQ test. But for sure, he's astoundingly adept at manipulating the earnest desires that people bring to him or
absolutely
around.
With zero care.
Zero care. I just had one other thought, and also going back to what we were saying earlier about the words and changing of words, especially with your area of expertise. In Nexium, it was bad to have an attachment. If you wanted something, if you desired something outside of a basic need, outside of food and shelter and blah, 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 it was a desire. You have an attachment.
It's a weakness.
Yeah. You want to be an actor. You want to build a community. Why? What's missing in you that you think you need that?
Oh, such classic manipulative abuse. He's flipping the script. Yeah. So he's taking what the things that are your strengths that would actually help you to be empowered in the world, and he's placing meaning on it that disempowers those things in order to continue to link you more to him and his agenda.
Yeah. And also promising if you evolve your
solution.
attachment, you'll get it. But you can't actually be attached to your attachment. It's like a twisting of Buddhism too.
We have to talk about that part of our whole weird connection too through all of this at some point
that's
in the
bizarre.
dialogue.
Yes.
Okay, so Epi, would you be willing to share a little bit about your story in terms of what you think were the risk factors?
Yeah, I'll give you a self-diagnosis, and then I guess the way I'm best is just ask me questions, and I'm pretty good at putting language to it. So I'd say, I was joking with Sarah this morning, my dad's kind of like Clint Eastwood. I grew up in a house, and the goods and bads of Clint Eastwood, right? Like, no, obviously not Dirty Harry, but like all my friends were like, your dad looks like Clint Eastwood. And like every one of my girlfriends and my brother's girlfriends separately made the connection, like, your dad looks like Clint Eastwood.
How interesting.
It's very interesting, yeah. And so he's an architect. I'm one of four boys. And I guess, I don't know, how would you put it? Like, he put pressure on us to perform. We were all good athletes, all average students, but it was just pressure to perform. And I got a lot of my self-esteem.
The gift he knew to give you was some form of mastery in performance, right? So like you're gonna like suck it up and you're gonna do the thing and you're gonna get good at it and you're gonna go after it. And we're not, there's no crying in baseball, that kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Played,
college football.
That's
football. Amazing.
We all did.
Quarterback.
Yeah. And we had fun. And it was made fun. And it was where we related. We watched games. And then the flip side of that is when I was a kid, we lived in Rome, Italy. My dad's architecture brought him over there for a year. And we went around, saw the Sistine Chapel and saw every Renaissance kind of thing. And my dad would walk me through it and talk to me about it. I think art is his sustenance. And so we bonded over, like, our favorite artist together is Caravaggio.
That sounds amazing.
And we got to see the Sistine Chapel, like, as an early age. So it had, like, that kind of thing. I'd say my mom, on another flip side of it, is her dad died when she was 9. I remember the day I figured out. It's a hard thing to say. I wouldn't say that it was as strong as I didn't need her, but I remember, like, she was trying to help me with homework at, like, a 3rd, 4th grade level. And I go, oh, I kind of had this awareness of, oh, my mom's not traditionally educated, right? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So,
yes, absolutely.
Like, based on my standards and practices as a kid, that meant something to me. That meant, like, she was inferior, or like, because my dad's high intellect, went to Georgia Tech, architect, went to Harvard. So my dad became the most pragmatic person for me to follow and listen to at that point. Maybe not when it was the best, right? He became the authority. And so my mom was also an alcoholic. So then there was other aspects to it where, like, I just recognized, okay, I love her.
She can't.
I think I saw her capacity level emotionally at an early age, and it freaked me out. But I still had a solid upbringing. Didn't need anything. Went to great schools. Had a dad I could go talk to. I could consult with. Mm-hmm. But on an emotional level, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about it. When I did run into something when I was around 18, 19 years old with a girlfriend, I had a really hard breakup. There was no outlet for me. And in fact, when I brought certain things to the table, it was made fun of and be like, oh, Nippy's in love. Little things like that at the time I dismissed, but there was just nothing for me. Also, I'm like trapped in this like athlete's body where I'm not supposed to have that.
Right.
That was my first traumatic event, 19, 20 years old. And I had a tool for everything. But that just wasn't in there, and I had to go do that alone.
That like made my heart so sad for like younger you.
It made mine sad for about a year. At least. Yeah. It was hard. It was really hard. It affected how I was as an athlete. I didn't know that at the time. I had it so compartmentalized and was just push through it. The limitations of my parenting's capacity yielded its head in heartbreak because I didn't have a girlfriend that,
Did you see your sweet wife crying on behalf of your 20-year-old?
Yes, I do.
It's the sweetest thing ever.
We've had this conversation.
I know, but that's the right reaction. That's like the tender-hearted.
That's why we're together.
I love it so much. I love that. Yeah. I would describe what you've said as a pretty typical, traditional avoidant experience. Your first traumatic experience was actually much younger. It was being in a 1-year-old body or a 6-month-old body and maybe a 2-year-old body. I don't know. And there not being anyone who could help you with your tender emotion. And at a very young age. So from the research we know at even children as young as 12 months of age, if there is no one who is emotionally capable of being responsive and present and soothing, learn to shut it all down, suck it all in, and to distract and avoid. And so that happened to you long before you have memory, because clearly neither one of your parents could do that realm. So your mom couldn't do a lot of even the functioning kind of stuff. Your dad functioned brilliantly. So you could get that. And like, you got that sense of a guide, like he could guide you.
Yeah.
But you didn't have anyone who could hold you, who could feel your feeling states with you and be with you in that and give you that mirroring and give you that support, which I know y'all are given to your boys now.
Yeah. Ad nauseum.
It's
great.
Right, to the degree where you're like,
yeah. Is this okay?
Are they going to be okay?
For more background on what brought us here, check out my page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped Nexium, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And if you want to see that story in streaming form, you can watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Diagnose Zeithochdruck. Wir verschreiben ausreichend Zeit für PatientInnen.
Herzlich willkommen im Krankenhaus St. Josef Braunau. Jetzt bewerben als Ärztin oder Arzt für Innere Medizin. khbr.at/Karriere.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
So then you come into this experience, and what was the moment or the moments, or was it the idea? What was it that you think brought you into the fold?
The girl who broke my heart.
What?
And I say the girl in air quotes. She was the person that shared it with me. I ran into her at a party in New York. I leave her name out. I protect her.
Absolutely.
I'd really like to leave her out of it as much as possible.
Yes.
And she was the one who told me about this thing. And like a year later.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm getting all this, because this is crazy. So you're in your 20s and you fall in love, and then she breaks your heart. And then what amount of time passes?
So probably like 3 years. And
Wasn't she your high school girlfriend?
She was my high school girlfriend. And then I go to college, and like it still was there.
Of course, you're this little kid who exists in avoidance forever. And then you have your first love, and there's this sense of being known and felt and in sync with someone. And your body is like, I was made for this, is so good. And then they break your heart.
Right.
Oh. I'm still mad at her, by the way.
It's not her. Like, she's a person too. She has nothing to do with it. It's just, anyway.
She's not in trouble. She's not in trouble.
No, she's not in trouble. Anyway, I run into her in New York City at a party, and she tells me she did this thing. There's a couple of interactions before that, but this is the gist of like, hey, I did this thing. And I was like, cool story. She needed it because she had just gotten divorced. And that was my mindset. That's how I minimized it. And I was like, good for you. Great. Glad you got your life back on. Was like hoping we might have something going on, but I was also in New York, and she was outside New York, and then she stayed on me. And
as we do.
I was going to say, yeah, rapport building was happening.
Yeah.
But also, like, this is how it happened. So when we dated, like, I had books around me, like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
I had biographies on Michael Jordan, John Elway, people that were athletes, and I was just reading about. I was interested. I had a goal set mindset, and that's what the curriculum espoused, right? So she comes to me and like, make a list of people that you know, and she's in contact with me. My old high school boyfriend, like this, he would love this stuff. He loves goal setting.
Totally.
So there's that component, but there's also like, she wants to build her network.
Well, and like when you're thinking strategically in that, you're going, I want to bring this to other people. I recruited a lot of people into religious settings. So it wasn't necessarily an cult, but I did that even as a kid. I did that as like a junior high student. So I get that mentality where you're like,
yeah.
Who connects with me? Who trusts me? Who could I help motivate into this space for the betterment of their life? And also then I get more recruits. right? Or like, there's this like, so yeah, of course she's thinking of you because you had a deep connection.
Yeah. And I didn't falter for that. I just felt like anyone who says they have the answer, blah, 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 blah. Like it was just all the normal red flags you would have to someone who went off and did something like that. And about a year later, she got me with something. I had just finished shooting an independent film. And every time I did a project that I felt like yielded me a little bit of money or I felt like was a good step for me in my career, I did something like take a trip, go see a friend. Like I would like reward myself. Like if I had something that paid like $5,000, I'd go, you know what? I earned this. I'm going to go see a friend in California, blah, blah, blah. I'd always do something like that. And she called me on the last day of filming this independent film, serendipitously. And she's like, hey, I put a deposit down that's what it was. I put a deposit down of like $250 a year earlier. I'd never done it. And she was calling me to say, hey, look, we're taking your deposit. She was a little bit angry. And because I still had a hook, her anger actually was one of the things that made me reconsider. And she says to me, you're just going to go out to LA and party with your friends and drink. And I was like, and she like said something about my goals. And I was like, she's fucking right. I'm going out to California because I'm going to go drink and try and chase girls for like whatever. And that's not in line with like
what I actually want,
what I'm actually wanting, what I'm doing. And she reminded me of that.
Yep.
And I got off the phone and I called her back. I go, okay, when's the next one? I'm there.
There's always true.
And I was still interested in her. Right.
Right.
And like she had told me her mom had done it. I'd known her parents since I was 15. So it's like her parents had done it. And then when she also said her dad had done it, I was like, your dad did it? Her dad's a brain surgeon. Went to Yale.
Yeah.
Like there's a template, there's a formula. I was like, okay, there's credibility there. Like there were so many variables.
Absolutely.
I almost didn't have a chance. Like if she was going to stay on me for a year and a half, like you were going to get me at some point, right? Because I ultimately trusted her too.
If you had like met someone else at that point and like fallen in love with them, that would have been a protective factor because that person would have been but maybe not. I mean, it all depends.
No. You're 100% right.
But at that point in your life, you're still single. She's still the person you feel the most like connected and attached to. And you are in a stage of development where you're needing to make some choices, like where the rubber meets the road. And she's one of the rare people in your life who's willing to speak that truth to you, right? Which is a problem in our culture, right? We're not all willing to speak truth. So then when someone is out here, I know, and
I get in trouble for that.
We're like, no.
I get in trouble for that. Sarah's always reeling me in. She's like, Nick, you can't. I go,
this
look,
is a new group of people.
I was like, if it's the fucking truth, why do I have to yield to their version of the world?
Just dial it back a little bit.
Like, well,
for
you
this,
don't have to
just for this group of people.
I'm just
for
like,
the first time.
I can't. All right, fine. Then I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to be boring. Anyway.
I think both of you have some incredible protective factors in terms of like you both have strong personalities. You both have lots of opinions. I think that's huge. Like, I think some of the folks, just watching the film, I mean, I want to be gentle in terms of just like interpreting people I've never met. Also, like that doesn't feel so random therapist. It's like,
tough.
But I was watching I think the people who were the least protected in that environment it was in their nature to be more of an appeasing personality, right? Like that kind of like more of a people pleaser.
Which I also am. I actually am less so now, but I people please strategically, I think, subconsciously.
I don't think it's disingenuous. It's just you use it in that domain as well, right?
But you're also very strong. I don't know. You have a strength to you.
And authentic. It's true.
Oh, yeah. No, it's definitely true.
I can vouch for it.
I can feel it. It's there. But I think as females, all of us have been hard trained to people please to some degree, right? We've learned that in culture because we talk about attachment, but gender also affects attachment. What we're being taught by our caregivers about our role in the world based on our sex and based on our gender identity. And so I know very few women who don't have some level of people pleasing.
It would be smart to as well.
Okay, since Pam has passed away, maybe we talk about Pam. Her personality, tell me if this is wrong, but she feels far more like someone who really, almost like she's like, oh, someone's taking the lead. This feels so good. Like it's more of a circumspect hardwiring maybe in her.
I have no idea really who she is because he found her so young.
He found her. I can give you some intel, but explain what you mean by that. Like,
so we all have temperaments. Okay, so our attachment patterns are about how we cope with our tender needs and our distress in relationships. That's what attachment is. And attachment is relationally driven. It's not inborn. Okay, so we all have the drive for attachment. But what happens in our attachment patterns is based on what our caregivers do with us and how we then
or don't do.
Right. Or don't do.
Yeah.
but we have a temperament, like a personality, right? I've got 3 kids. They're all so different, right? And they come out of the womb that way. And you can feel that in your kid. I mean, I felt them in my womb differently. I'd be like, what is this? I had twins, so I could feel the difference of them in my womb. Like, it's wild.
That's nuts.
It is nuts. But so I joke with my twins that one of them, she is hardwired to give you the shirt off of her back. She is just, I mean, I would say she probably has a little bit more of that Pam personality. Like, she just wants to be in harmony with people. And she's like that as a toddler.
Yeah.
Another kid, she'd be playing with something. Another kid would be like, can I come to grab it? And she'd be like, here you go. And she'd just play with something else. And then her sister is hardwired to knife you for the shirt on your back. It is like, she is just so strong-willed. And they're both obviously so much more nuanced than this. But truly, like, there's something different in their temperament ilk. And I think, so there's a vulnerability in that as well. And I would say, Sarah, one of the things I don't see in you is that you have a mix of things. Like, you're highly relational. You want to connect. You want to support people. You're highly supportive. Like, the connection is the core piece. But you're also not a doormat, dear. And like, you got roped into things, and that mind control kind of process of someone getting you to all of a sudden question everything in your body and your will and not run the fuck out of the room when someone's about to burn you, right? You were trained to submit in a way that you would not have naturally in your personality submitted if you had not been put in the warm water and the temperature slowly turned up. But I think there are folks who are in there who aren't wired with as much of a sense of will as you have. And so I think they got in deeper and darker. And the further you're in, the more distorted you are, right? The less you're eating, the less you're sleeping, the more that your calories are being controlled. Even that point of view that was like, I'm not going to do this calorie control thing.
Yes, you're right. I did have a will with certain things. And I think, like in Nexium, they used to call it that you were either more ethics bound or rule bound. And I determined that I was a bit of a rule follower, but that was externally. Internally, I didn't go for it. Like, I would pretend to do certain things we were all supposed to do, but inside I'm like, fuck that, I'm not doing it. But I knew that I had to do it to like maintain my status in the company.
Yeah, totally.
Is that the mix you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's why also, tell me if this feels right, but my sense is that the other protective factor was each other. Like, it was the two of you coming together and being married and having belonging there. And that when you come home and you have this, like, you've been assaulted, that was a physical assault to your body, that Nippy, you were like, what the fuck?
Once I showed it to him.
And then, Sarah, you were able to then absorb that from him and be like, yeah, this, like you, but he was also echoing what was already true in your body. You had written out your story. Like, the what the fuck was there the whole, why am I naked? Why am I blindfolded? What is happening? And then you were trained to go, okay, but it's here. She's my best friend. I think that means this is okay. Okay. And then you'd also been trained to show strength in a particular way, to endure abuse as a form of valor, right? Like, all these things there. But then you have this attachment experience where you can come back after this really distressing thing, and Nippy's bearing witness, and you can go, oh yeah, this is not good.
Also,
yeah,
Eli,
he got it right away. He got it.
I was always in her ear about how shit wasn't good.
Wow.
In the company. I was all in on what we were doing. Right? Like, I thought, okay, if we can get this, the philosophy of it, we get this to the world and get people thinking and asking questions this way, it felt really good to be a part of something like that. How things were run, what was going on. I was always in Sarah's ear. I decided I wasn't going to go fight these people on this stuff because those weren't interesting fights to me, and they're still not. I'm not trying to win arguments with people that don't want to have a civil discourse. That's what it felt like. And I felt like if Sarah was in a situation, I would go to her and Mark Vicente. I was in their ear all the time about, why is this person in a position of authority? Why are we doing that sort of thing? So I felt the ceiling of growing within the company. I didn't necessarily think the philosophy was rotten. And then I kind of felt like, it's kind of like the philosophy ended up being a front. If my wife has to do something like this, and even the stuff that was going on, it was character. A slow burn that I was,
Yeah. You had already been in a place of skepticism.
Yeah, there's the emotional congruency was there was more of a chasm of like, here's what we're doing and here's what's really going on. It just it was getting too hard to bear. It was headed here anyway. It was just a matter of what our threshold was.
Yep, totally. That makes perfect sense.
And it was headed there. Like, when you go back, you go, yep. Like, first of all, 2 or 3 people dying around him of cancers. That was a real sticky point for me for a long time. I don't
two
know
highest ranks too.
I don't know how long I was going to be in a company. Like, let's say this doesn't happen to my wife. There were still things that I just didn't. How's that happening? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
There was always what the fuck's going on here?
Yep.
It felt like when we were away from Albany, okay, this feels great. We're working with people's goals here. You go back to Albany, and I was like,
this is freaking weird.
Everyone looked like their dog just died.
And also incredibly thin,
Right.
like anorexic thin.
Yes.
There wasn't a city on the hill that we could aspire to.
Yep.
In fact, we were out in Vancouver, Mexico City, and all that stuff. The proof wasn't in the pudding at the closest epicenter of what we were doing. It was a hard thing to reconcile, but I didn't necessarily think it was something I had to reconcile right away.
It took that experience to be able to recognize it as not just, there's some malfunction, dysfunction, funny things into, this is actually sadistic abuse.
Yeah.
Right. And now we start peeling it back and we recognize this is sadistic sexual abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do I use violence? When do I use violence?
And even
that's where I was.
Well, that's
tell me where I gotta be.
That's a reaction to chaos, right? When we enter into chaos and the absence of control, and we're then there's that drive to find control. Like, how can I right this wrong? How can I which of course, had you beat the shit out of Keith, it wouldn't have changed the fact that all this abuse had happened, right? It would have just...
That didn't change anything.
It would have given you a momentary release and maybe some time in prison. And so I'm glad you didn't do that.
That's why he didn't do it.
That's why I didn't do it.
Because of me and Troy.
Also, philosophically and morally, ethically and all that stuff, if you start handling your problems with violence, number one, expect more.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? You put yourself in a totally different demographic of society, like... where it's a primordial reaction to something that, like, if you're going to go there, you got to make sure you're going there and it's like you're going all in and you're deciding to live your life that way. And I've decided to hit pause on that.
Thank you.
I think that was a wise choice.
Yeah,
I'm in line with that choice.
I'm very glad. I'm very glad.
I also understand it. I'm Scotch-Irish. So, like, I have that honor culture thing that comes up in me. Like, when someone's dishonored me or anyone I love, like, there is an instinct to bring in the fisticuffs. I'm obviously not that big. Can't probably take too many people down, but I understand the urge.
Oh, I had a whole plan.
I'm not going to ask you to recite it.
It had blueprints. I got my architect dad to draw the blueprints. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. So that was part 1 of our convo with Eli Harwood. We'll bring you back for part 2 next week. See our show notes for more information on her excellent books or visit attachmentnerd.com to learn more.
Until then, come hang out with us on Patreon. We'll be chatting about this episode and answering your questions in our latest bonus episodes. And now you can get access to all the content for just $5 a month. Pretty economical.
And also as a reminder, if you want to join the inner circle, we now have silver and black fanny packs instead of the classic ALBC hat as the bonus to go with the signed copy of my book.
There might be a lightning bolt in there too for you.
It's pretty rad. If you're into fanny packs, this is the one for you. So thanks for listening to A Little Bit Culty, everyone. May your attachments be secure and your hearts open. How's that for a new sign-off?
That's great. I put the Annie and fanny pack, though.
Okay, we'll workshop it.
Okay.
See you next time.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out a-little-bit-culty.com/culty resources and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.
That's the sound of your current hype level at the gas pump. But brace yourself for something fuel-nominal, because Unleaded 88 is about to take the hype to a whole new level. Unleaded 88 is cheaper, cleaner, and greener than regular unleaded. Plus, it's homegrown, making Unleaded 88 the clear choice at the pump and totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, brought to you by Iowa Corn.